When the neighbor, Aunt Zoe, asked if Mary could sleep alone tonight, I had to be honest and say she couldn't. It was frightening to look at her grandmother's empty bed, and impossible not to. The silence rang around to the point of ringing in my ears. Who invented this omen to stop the clock in the house when a person dies in it? My grandmother loved her old clock, its rustling, its sound. When Grandma brought little Mary here, the clock had been here a long time. Mary cried. The first night, Grandma sat on her bed and quietly comforted her. You see, you and I will make a good life together, like girlfriends. I have chosen the coziest corner for your bed. Doesn't the clock bother you? You hear, it soothes you. Mary quietly nudged the pendulum and cried silently. It couldn't be that Grandma was gone. When she had been told as a 6-year-old that Mommy and Daddy were dead, she hadn't believed it for a very long time. Somewhere they must be somewhere now, and therefore someday they will come. That's why she flatly refused to leave their home. She doesn't even remember why she agreed. I guess her grandmother managed to persuade her in some miraculous way. Grandma had a way of doing that. At first, Mary was still terribly afraid that she would be taken away by some of the strangers who appeared in the house after Mom and Dad disappeared. There wasn't a single evil person among them. They were just all complete strangers. She was afraid to even cry in front of them, let alone answer their questions. When they asked her something, she didn't just keep silent, but turned away just in case. That way they would get away from her faster, stop noticing her. One day some aunt pestered her. She said that tomorrow she had to go to kindergarten. Mary turned away and looked at the front door, pretending not to hear anything. Instead, Mary answered some incomprehensible nonsense from their neighbor Eveline with her purple curly head. I'll tell you honestly, I'm not surprised. This is a very spoiled girl. Her upbringing has not been seriously handled by anyone. And just at that moment the front door Mary was looking at opened, and a short, thin woman in blue jeans and white, blue flowered sneakers quietly entered, who heard everything, because she immediately answered something incomprehensible too, even though no one had time to ask her. Come on, are you such a close family friend to judge this, and even more confidently express your opinion out loud? And who are you? Violet Eveline took offense. I'm Mary's grandmother, her daddy's mom. I haven't seen you around here. Grandma. Mary shouted and rushed toward the stranger before she could think of anything, just to escape Eveline. Well, hello, honey, she heard a voice above her and warm hands stroking her hair. Right. It's her daddy's mom. She had the same kind and light hands. Daddy had said so often that Mary had the kindest and most beautiful grandmother that Mary couldn't wait to see her. She had long ago been promised to be taken far away to another town to visit her grandmother. And now Grandma had come herself and turned out to be just that. Papa had never lied. After getting to know her grandmother, Mary immediately stopped being afraid of all the terrible fears. It turned out that she and her grandmother had no one but each other. Mary was overjoyed when she learned that it would be just the two of them. It's so nice that it's just you and me, Grandma. No strangers. Grandpa would have loved you very much too. You can be sure of that, Grandma smiled. She wasn't very happy that it was just the two of them with Mary. There were many pictures of Grandpa in the house, but all in albums and only one on the wall. On it, a young dark-haired uncle, cheerful and strong, sat in a boat, and on his lap held a little boy, a little older than Mary. The boy was very serious, frowning and gripping the oars tightly. Mary immediately recognized that this boy was her daddy. They had pictures of him as a child at home, too. Grandma said here they were fishing. It had been some very fishy summer, and they had had a terrific vacation. And in the early fall, 2 days after returning from vacation, Grandpa was killed in the line of duty. Little Mary was afraid to ask what that execution was, and her grandmother didn't explain. Further family history, sad but in some ways also beautiful, grandmother revealed to the growing up Mary later. Her dad grew up and went to Dallas to study. To her mom's joy and relief, he had absolutely no desire to follow in his father's footsteps, no attraction to any dangerous service, and simply enrolled as a project engineer. Thoughtful and focused Henry was very suitable for this specialty. Everyone around him thought so too. No one expected any adventures from the guy, but he did. He fell in love with a girl from a wealthy family. And he didn't just fall in love for a while, he really fell in love. Everything about him was like that. Both her mother and stepfather were sure that sooner or later she would marry the son of a family friend with whom her stepfather had a business partnership. The lad was indeed very shallow, educated in London, had returned, and was making a significant contribution to his father's business. He was in his late 30s, financially well off. Why not get married? Mom and stepfather at first quietly, then more and more frankly and firmly began to push student Emma to a profitable, prosperous marriage. At first she joked, perhaps too carefully and for a long time, so that the family had time to realize that her refusal not the whim of a spoiled princess, but the time had come to speak seriously. Emma inhaled a little audibly, exhaled noisily and announced, "The thing is, I have another fiancé." "Who is he?" Tumnomno asked Mom, secretly hoping that the beautiful daughter went to her and knows how to find the best of the possible. And Mom was disappointed, extremely disappointed. The groom turned out to be a young engineer, yesterday's graduate of the institute, found a job in a simple construction firm. Everything would be all right, but the groom's mother is the widow of some provincial policeman. And so for this almost rustic, shabby boy, his mother raised Emma her own. Emma with clear skin, a black profile and soft green almond-shaped eyes. Love. But I had it too. I loved your daddy when I married him, who got involved in an obscure project and left me and you penniless. If it wasn't for Jimmy, you'd have grown up in the slums. That's how Mom greeted her daughter's news. Jimmy himself, Mama's husband and benefactor, was brief. "You will marry our friend. We have long agreed." Mom was afraid of his weighty statements, but Emma somehow not. She married her Henry, and her parents fulfilled their promise. They cut her out of the family. Especially since they had another girl growing up, little Helga. Their shared daughter with her stepfather was surely more fortunate and promising than this one, who had inherited from her father. Grandmother Mary said, "I am passing on to you as your mother told me. I add nothing of my own. If you want, you can always look up your mother's side of the family. I once thought it was wrong that they weren't told of your birth. But when your parents died, my matchmakers were notified, just knowing about it just in case. And you decide for yourself. There was nothing to decide. No one had come for Mary except Grandma Ann, so she had no relatives anymore. Now Grandma App is gone, so no one at all. All alone in the whole wide world. Anthony was very supportive. You have to move on, not mourn endlessly, so he consoled the girl and convinced her to go to Chicago. What's there to catch? He's a car mechanic, a beginner, but a good one, with excellent references. If Mary rented their apartment with his grandmother, and he added his savings, and then quickly got a job, they could easily rent a small apartment in a residential neighborhood and still have something left over to live on. Remember, I told you about my ideas before, but you were so afraid to leave your grandmother, as if you were glued to her. And now there's nothing keeping you here. There was nothing holding Mary back now. She wouldn't dare go alone to a strange, unfamiliar city. But Chicago was her mom's hometown. Plus, she'd have Anthony around to keep her company. Aunt Zoe shook her head. "Oh, I don't know. Sure, I'll help rent out the apartment. I'll supervise the tenants. But it's so little, barely enough for a room in St. Petersburg. Life prices are different there, everything. You're just out of college, you have no experience. It'll take you a while to find a job. And live on what? At least here you're at home. And I'll always have a bowl of soup for you if you need it. It's just the two of us. Anthony has thought of everything, made some savings, and he'll find a job with his qualifications right away. We'll certainly live no worse than here. He understands that at first it's all up to him." Aunt Zoe waved her hand back and forth. She got up from her chair, walked around the room, silently, and said, "Your business, grandmother's apartment, is yours alone. And in that sense, there is nothing to be afraid of. But I do not like these fashionable marriages without painting. It's old-fashioned. This is for guys as good and convenient. All these will live and see. Something doesn't suit us, we'll run away and share nothing. You can live with a new one every year. And for us girls, what good is that? Not a wife, not a bride. It's just a trial, temporary. And what hope is there for such a husband? Well, if only he had settled in the city, created, as they call it, a base, and then dragged you with him. But no, he decided to stick to his grandmother's apartment, to make his life easier. And maybe it would be good for you here. You have your own place anyway. And we are all our own. And Grandma Ann would probably say the same thing. You know as well as I do Dot at the tactless mention of grandmother one might have taken offense, but Mary took no offense. Grandma would have understood, she replied with conviction. Of course Grandma Ann would understand. She understood a lot more about relationships than the rest of the grown-up aunts. Mary somehow knew that for sure. The other thing was that if Grandma had been alive, Mary wouldn't have dared to move so far away from her. And now it didn't matter anymore. It was as if the stars had taken to helping Mary and Anthony. Surprisingly, quite quickly found decent tenants for a long time, a young couple with a baby. Mary prepared in advance, disassembled and neatly stacked grandmother's wrinkled things, gave them to Aunt Zoya for storage. She took only her watch with her. It's so bulky. Why do you have to bring it with you? Anthony wondered. I'll hang it in our rented apartment so I can have something of my own. Well, if that's the way you want it, let it be, Anthony agreed generously. In Chicago, too, everything worked out as planned. We quickly found both an apartment for the right price and a job for Anthony. True, the apartment was very cramped and nowhere further from the subway, and the job was on the opposite side of town. But that's not a big deal if you don't pick on the little things. Mary put things on the shelves in the closet and hung the grandmother's clock on the wall. Walked around the store at home, made some soup, and sat down at her laptop. She had to look for a job, too. Of course, she has no experience, but in college she took first places in hairdressing, creative competitions. And she has diplomas, and she agrees to the most modest salary, if only there was an opportunity to gain experience. Coming from work, Anthony several days in a row forced the same picture, a clean apartment, dinner on the stove. A focused Mary sending out her resume to salons. Anthony was staunchly against Mary working. He said that if they were saving money, they had enough, and in case of emergency, she could just raise the rent to her tenants. Summer came, and Anthony's conviction that there was no reason for her to work came in handy. Although it was a cool, windy summer with frequent rain, it was still a beautiful summer. The city no longer seemed unprincipled and gray to Mary when there was thick shade, clean greenery in the parks. One day Mary went to the museum and did not notice how she spent 3 hours there. She told Anthony at home over dinner and suggested, let's go together again this weekend. I didn't have time to see and memorize everything there, and then we'll go somewhere else. Why did we come here if we can't see anything? We're here to make money. We didn't come here to spend. Anthony explained condescendingly. I can see it all later if I want to. Anthony was working hard and saving money for some important plans, which he promised to tell me about later. A neighbor on the floor, Helen, with whom Mary had become friendly, thought Mary was lucky to have Anthony. You know how infantile guys are nowadays. You've got a hard-working guy. Take my Jack, for instance. We already have Bruno for 2 years. For my husband, the main thing is his friends, his company. Friends are the center of the world. They always need to throw themselves in, help at the first call. And it doesn't matter that his wife had other plans. She's not bored with the baby either. A son is always fun. They're all selfish. Most of them are. So you're still an okay option. Although you're pretty, you could do better finding someone to take you around. But I don't think so. So yes, your option is very good. Mary felt uncomfortable after Helene's words about the options, even if she didn't feel comfortable saying that she was missing something. She had a completely different idea of their life in Chicago. It seemed to her that they had been together for 100 years and Anthony had stopped loving her truly like he used to. He comes home from work tired, often irritated over nothing, collapses on the sofa waiting for food, and looks at Mary as something that always was, is, and will be. Like the central heating radiators, for example. It's true that he changes at night, especially before the weekend. Remembers that there are affectionate words. Promises that he will definitely think of something interesting for the vacation. It's probably just fatigue and worry. Will he be able to achieve something in a foreign city, in a megalopolis? Of course, it's hard to get accustomed here. Still, it's a lot of work for two. Everything is getting more expensive so soon, and the landlord is hinting at a pay rise. We'll have to find a job after all. At first, Anthony will grumble, but then he'll realize that it's better this way. And he won't have time to be bored and think of all sorts of silly things. And it will be interesting, because a hairdresser is a man of art, no matter how much his lover giggles at it. Mary thought, consulted, and decided to try a different job search tactic. Nothing gives nothing to go sending out resumes listing prize-winning children's contests from college, when there is no experience at all. Probably at the same time 1,000s of the same girls are sending out 1,000s of resumes. Helen advised her to go through the salons herself, in person. And Mary, barely waiting for Anthony to leave for work, went looking for happiness. There were plenty of salons and establishments under the modest sign hairdressers even in walking distance. 4 salons did not show the slightest interest in her, but in a tiny, modest, semi-basement, under the glamorous name of Orchid Bored Brunette, after a short survey, Mary revived. She complained to her guests that her shiftmate was constantly missing work, causing the salon's operations to be disrupted, and promised to tell the owner of the establishment about her. "I can tell by you that you are different. If I put a question to the owner or me or Helga, he will ask her, because he knows very well who is worth what here. He doesn't pay much, so he doesn't have the nerve to expect a supermaster. Our contingent is also local. The same grandmothers and aunts for years. The demands are not very fancy. I bet you've been training on the same neighbors from home. Yeah, well, nothing unexpected. Leave a phone number. I'll call you when I come over. Introduce myself to our dentist. My name." I promised to get him ready. Mary liked Kristen, and the reassurance reassured her. But for some reason the air in the semi-basement room seemed somehow musty, sickly sweet, dizzy and nauseous under her throat. She said goodbye politely and hurried outside, where she barely made it to the far corner of the house before vomiting into the grass. It became a little Pandrucci, but suddenly there was an incomprehensible weakness, as if all the strength suddenly somewhere in an instant went away. Mary was even a little frightened and decided not to go home, but first to Helen to tell her the news. She was happy for her, but marveled at her pallor. Helen shook her head thoughtfully. "I don't want to scare you. It's better to just test right away and rule out the assumption. I have a test lying around somewhere in my medicine cabinet." "What kind of test?" "I don't get it, Mary." "Are you 100% sure you can't be pregnant?" "Then I'm jealous." Helen waved her hands. "Do you think we're from the middle of nowhere?" Mary smiled. "Of course we're using protection." "Aha. I believe every word you say," Helen nodded. "When people tell me how handsome Bruno is, I say, what do you want? It's electronically verified. We planned for later, 5 years from now. But he did it his way. Here I found a test, and don't think about all the horrible things beforehand. Maybe there's nothing. Or maybe there is, but everything will be fine." Why hadn't she thought to ask Helen how best to break the news? Hinting is kind of silly. It's got to be direct. Only at the right moment, not on the doorstep, but when Anthony had eaten dinner and was resting a little. Mary waited until nightfall. And when the lights went out, she whispered in a half-whisper, "Anthony, I'm pregnant." "Are you sure?" "The smells in the barber shop made me sick. Helen gave me a test and it showed 2 stripes. "You're not kidding, are you?" Anthony stretched out peacefully. "You know I don't recognize such stupid jokes." "I'm serious. Helen told me that their Bruno showed up the same way, despite the measures. It's not that uncommon. No method can be completely, 100% trusted." Mary didn't know what to say next. She fell silent, and there was silence. Only her grandmother's clock ticked on the wall. Why was Anthony silent too? Is he gathering his thoughts? Now he would hug her, say, "Don't be afraid, we'll raise the child." I found the problem. I'll solve it. It must have been half an hour before Mary decided to speak again. "Anthony, I'm scared when you don't say anything. I don't want to say it's your fault. So why don't you go to the doctor tomorrow and find out how much it costs to get it out quickly? And I'll give you whatever you need from my savings." She heard some completely alien voice. Mary reached a shivering and frozen hand over her head, fumbled for the switch on the wall sconce, and turned on the light as if she wanted to make sure it was her Anthony. It was him. And he shaded himself from the light with his hand. "Well, what else have you decided to do to me?" "Well, you're not hysterical. Are you going to tell me you want a baby?" "But that's nonsense. Why do we need one? Especially now." Mary tried to catch his eye, but he warded it off with the palm of his hand and curved his mouth unhappily. Her ability to speak suddenly returned to her. "I didn't want anyone, because I didn't think about it. I can't abort. If there's already a child, I'll love it. My grandmother told me that my father was happy when he found out I was coming. Although he and my mom didn't have anything at the time, he just loved her very much. So he loved their baby right away. I mean me. Of course, your dad's the noble knight and I'm the scoundrel. Did you ever think that he hoped to make peace with his rich wife's family by having a child? No, that's life, baby. Mary silently slipped her feet into her flip-flops, went into the kitchen and cried, resting her head on the table. Whether her daddy was counting on it or not, he still couldn't say, "Put that away quickly, Dot." She knows he couldn't. She used to carry a small photograph of him behind the cover of her passport. There Henry and Emma are squatting, holding the handles on both sides of a tiny girl in a crimson jumpsuit. Stop whimpering, she heard a good-natured voice above her. Go to sleep tomorrow. If you are afraid yourself, I'll take you to the doctor. Well, I'm sorry about that. Soon you won't even remember it. I'm not getting rid of the baby. Of course you're in favor of creating poverty. I could have guessed that when you were picking up stray cats with kittens. Only I'm not a stray. Mary interrupted him quietly. Look, let's you sleep, calm down, and in the morning we'll talk intelligently. I'm at work tired as a dog, and here at home Brazilian series. If you want to talk without drama, call me. Mary watched in silence as Anthony raked the shelves without looking and threw his underwear and clothes into a gym bag. Don't worry, he'll play free wolf, cool down and come back. He'll ask for forgiveness. The main thing is to pretend that you are mortally offended and convinced that you'll get along just fine without him, Helen exhorted and admonished Magga. I don't need to pretend I'll get along just fine without him. If not fine, then terrible. I'll still have to get along somehow, Dot grimly assured Mary. Well, what are you getting down about? Helen continued to comfort her, not very confidently. Mary interrupted her. I'm sorry, you're the best. But you don't need any of this. He doesn't need me. I saw it last night. I don't know why I didn't see it before. No, when I was handy, he needed me. Aunt Zoe was right. If I didn't have the money from my grandmother's rent, he wouldn't have brought me here. He would have left alone, promised to come back for me, and disappeared. He's so-and-so is gone now, Dot. Mary could not stand it and burst into tears again, crying and angry with herself for crying, for not being able to linger. It was as if Helen had read her mind. That's right. Don't be shy with me. Cry as much as you need to so we'll calm down faster. I know what I'm talking about. We fools believe we're loved, that they'll take care of us. Sometimes we're lucky not to be wrong, and often we're not, Dot. Anthony did not return. Calming down, if you could call her quiet, confused state that, Mary considered and realized there were no things left in the apartment for him to come back for. All the little things they had managed to buy in the household mattered only to Mary herself. Anthony had taken his clothes. Was he so afraid of a child that he was willing to sacrifice his comfort to live with a single friend? Mary endured a week and finally dialed his number. The subscriber's phone is switched off or out of range. Dot. Maybe we should go see him at work after all, Helen reasoned aloud, to whom the confusion had passed. Do you want me to ask Jack? He won't say no. He's such a chatterbox. It's not hard for him to talk man to man. Find out at least how your Anthony is in tune. Magus raised her eyes to her. She'd lost weight, her face was drained, and her anxious green-brown eyes seemed huge on him. Maybe he's not sure yet. Do you know how cowardly they really are? Yeah, Mary smiled strained. I'm all out of money. I've gotten into an untouchable transfer from my grandmother's apartment, which I'm using to pay for this place. If I gobble up that money, I won't have anything to pay the landlord here very soon. Next month already. And Anthony knows how the money is, and he doesn't care. What have you and the baby decided? Helen asked cautiously. I don't know what to decide. I'd feed myself, no question, but the baby, how? What are we going to live on when he's born and I can't work yet? I have no one. I don't even have anyone to come to ask to babysit while I work, and I can't get rid of him. Don't look at me like that, I can't, that's all. I think it would be even worse then than it is now. Helen walked around the kitchen, looked in the spice jars for some reason and said, if your creep doesn't show up, you can always go home. At least there's all those aunts there who were friends with your grandmother there to help you out. But it's a last resort to go back without a dime. You've got a very short time. You could get a job here in Chicago. Ideally an official one, of course, with maternity leave and everything. Employers don't like that. When it's all clear, they say you got the job on purpose. But they have their own truth, you have your own. You need to live, and they don't care. But with your profession and no experience, it may not work out that way. So you've got to have something to fall back on. I'll always buy you a meal and feed you. If you don't spend your paycheck, save up some money here and go back to your town with a little money for the first time. Or maybe you'll be lucky enough to find something decent. Then you can stay in Chicago any way you want. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's what I'd do if I were you. Work first, and then we'll see. Mary thought she would too. As soon as she did, her cell phone rang half an hour later. It was Kristen from the Orchid. Mary, hi. Look, I won't tell you over the phone, but I think I have something for you. Our dentist wants to take a look at you. He said he'd be at the dealership by 3 this afternoon, so come on over. You want your papers? I doubt he'll be looking at your papers right away. Well, take your passport just in case. I have no idea what he'll think of our unpredictable. It's a good thing she's not nauseous today, and she looks pretty good. She'd washed her hair, carefully painted her eyes, put on the newest of her weekday dresses, and even slipped into heeled sandals, though she usually ran in more comfortable shoes. By 3 o'clock, she was at the salon. The director had to wait another half hour. Mary was having coffee with Rita and a customer from the next doorway, a bright, fresh, red-haired, cheerful lady. The bosses aren't late, the bosses are late, girls, the lady announced, wiggling funny. She entertained Mary and Kristen with funny life stories, and the wait was neither anxious nor boring. But when the principal did arrive, the hilarious client quickly said goodbye and left. Kristen, instead of mouthing off, you might want to clean this place up for once. Not a quick sweep, but a decent one. I can't believe you don't have time. I can see from your receipts that you have time. This, he said from the doorstep, without anger, with lazy irritation instead of greeting. The director turned out to be a dense, stocky middle-aged man in a bright Hawaiian shirt that was tight on his stomach. Have a cheerful outlook on life, Dennis. Something wrong. Just yesterday I was, smart girl, Kristen sang out. Is this the girl you were telling me about? Dennis changed the subject. Yes, this is Mary, a certified hairdresser with credentials, certificates. Let's give it a try. This girl really needs a job. She's just dying to work. She won't ask for time off. Isn't that right, Mary? Yes, Mary said, trying to be convincing. With a friendly glance at Mary, Dennis chuckled. But the thing is, I don't need another hairdresser. I'd try to get an experienced one, if she's any better than Oli. I won't mess with you, so why did you ask me to come? Mary asked, confused. Kristen gave you a lot of praise. I just wanted to see if you'd like to come. I have a restaurant in addition to this place. Now I need another waitress. Cute and smart, the girl accepted the offer, because even seasonal work is a waitress, but not in the specialty, better than nothing. And so before Mary knew it, she was already working in the Café Violet for the 4th week. Yes, Dennis and his companion Pablo had such a taste for names. The institution was located in the same semi-basement room as the Orchid, but the area was larger. There was 1 cook and an assistant and 2 waitresses per shift. One of the girls had recently graduated and decided to change the job she had held onto while she was a student. Mary was hired in her place. The restaurant was quite cozy, frequented, inexpensive, and the place was quite busy. And the food was good. And one more plus at work, they fed, of course, not the same as the clients, but cheaper and simpler pasta or potatoes with meat, sticky wiener, or chicken leg. At first, Mary was very happy she wouldn't have to spend money on food on weekdays, saving money again. But more and more often, there were days when every trip to the kitchen for an order became a feat for her. The mere smell of food made her sick. Mary worked in shifts 2 days and 2 days from 11 to 23. And you could never guess in the morning how the shift would go. You would fly from morning till evening and chew cabbage, carrots, and apples all day, or barely crawl, holding onto the wall and trying not to look at the food, coming to the kitchen for an order. The doctor at the women's clinic, where Mary was registered under temporary registration, explained that she has toxicosis, and so often happens. In general, it's nothing terrible, soon it should pass. I wish it would pass soon. Moshet nenormal inyi kukoitu. Nedoverchivo pervala ego Helen. When Ben's cook changes, Mary is calmer. He doesn't notice anything. He doesn't understand it. Like all guys, he thinks it's not much. The girl didn't sleep well. and the cook Kristen looked suspiciously, as if she had guessed everything long ago. Mary tried not to think about it, remembering Helen's admonition. You need to take care of your nerves now, or you'll have a lot of trouble later with a nervous child. It's just a job. You've done it, and you're off. You don't care what anyone thinks. Helen herself knew how to do that. She recently came back to work from maternity leave, returned to her accounting department, and told about the naggingly picky chief accountant with laughter, without resentment and worry. Maybe it was a good thing that heat was a rarity in Chicago. It felt heavy with the humidity here. Or was it just Mary who thought so now? But one day on the shift, it got unbearable. Nothing. It would soon be over. She ran into the locker room, behind which was the bathroom, pulled the door open, undid the top 2 buttons of her white work blouse so it wouldn't get dirty. When she was about to get up and go into the hall, she heard behind her back, "Don't make any sudden movements, girl. There are only 2 tables. The waitress will manage without you. Let's make peppermint tea. It helps. I've got a lot of mint growing in my cottage. I'll give it to you at home if you want it. Ginger tea helps with that too, and you should eat more often and sleep more. I've had 2, I know." Kristen looked at Mary without mockery, but without pity, with calm understanding and sympathy. For some reason, Mary felt not scared, but much relieved that she did know. In 10 minutes in the kitchen, while drinking mint tea, she told the cook her whole story. "Svet, are you going to take the groceries?" Pavel inquired behind her back. Mary even forgot that she felt sick, and realized with sober horror that Paul could hear their conversation. This companion, Dennis, young, thin, and silent, frightened her very much. For some reason unpleasant, always comes unheard, such as his gait. With cooks still sometimes greets, even something else will say. The waitresses in general are like furniture to him. They never even dignify him with a word. Mary jumped up at his discovery and happily clung to the elbow of her colleague who appeared in the kitchen. Oops, in the evening Dennis arrived in yet another Hawaiian shirt, and with a particularly heavy odor of booze for Mary. He regarded the girl squeamishly and tiredly and held out an envelope. "Payment is yours for the month. Check it out, it's honest. You don't work anymore. Why?" Mary asked with barely moving lips. How insolent modern girls are, especially those from the periphery like you. What makes you think you have the right to lie and set someone up if you had the foolishness to get pregnant? Something will happen to you at work, and you will go to some labor inspectorate and tell how the bastard director did not register you for work, exploited you, and you will be tired of demanding maternity money. I will not scold you and scare you, so that you do not immediately faint me. I'm just asking you to be quiet for now, and not try to pull something like that. He was almost friendly, without any anger. A smooth, lazy voice. Mary had a lot of things she wanted to say, but kept quiet. She wanted to toss him his money, but silently took the envelope. It would come in handy. It wasn't even for her. The next day, Mary slept most of the day. She woke up twice, drank strong tea in the kitchen, and went back to bed. Nothing wanted to do, nothing to think about. It was as if a dark curtain had fallen over her eyes. And in the evening, Helen rang the doorbell. "Come to our place. Jack is calling you himself. He wants to tell you something." "He didn't send it through me," Helen announced. Jack was sitting in the kitchen, finishing his soup from a deep basin-like bowl. "Mary, I found out something for you. Maybe it'll be good for you. A buddy of mine, Andrew, is a decorator. He recently renovated a private house in the suburbs for a grandfather. The grandfather's house is fine, but he lives alone. He penetrated. He sees that he's a normal, honest kid, and shared that he would rent one room to a woman for the usual household help, and that she was to him as a companion, so even for free. There are all sorts of errands and talk. That's the deal. A favor for a favor. His living conditions are very good. He's not picky about cleaning, cooking. That's what he told me. Andrew says exactly a normal, proper grandfather. Just alone and with money. He says he can always get it through an agency, but he doesn't trust them very much. That's why he asks all his good friends for a recommendation. I thought of you right away." "Lying again?" Mary asked tiredly. Suddenly a good man, he expects a quiet old age. And I'm here at him bang and suddenly have a baby. And if I find a job again, how will I have time to do his errands? Then you'll have to pay for the room like you're supposed to. Let's Andrew tell him honestly that this is your situation. That's probably the right thing to do. Let him decide for himself. Mary nodded. Even Jack wanted to help her. She'd thought he hated her for being around a lot. That didn't make sense. I don't think it's going to work out, but you have to say thank you and pretend you're hopeful. So she did. Jack went to his Andrew. Helen exhaled noisily and suggested, let's have some cherry pie for the night. If you really want it, you can have it once. Go and have a look, you've got nothing to lose. Just take a good look at the landlord. Cunning, of course, the old man, instead of hiring a housekeeper for a salary, is looking for a lodger who will perform the same duties for a room. Don't be shy, just ask directly what exactly you'll have to do. Maybe there's a lot of work involved and it's easier to rent a room for money than do it all every day. To be honest, I couldn't do it. There are 1,000,000 reasons to pick on you, but you still have to see it. On his first day off, Jack took Mary to meet his grandfather, who was renting out a room. According to him, the grandfather was not at all confused by Mary's story. He didn't even ask anything. Helen planned to contact her husband and her friend, thinking of a good excuse to take a walk with the child in the countryside. But Bruno was sick and cranky, and they didn't have time for a walk. Mary imagined for some reason a big wooden house in a clearing like merchants' estates from movies about old life. But the house turned out to be brick, also faced with stone without any flash, but very stylish and beautiful. It was surrounded by a small garden, a few apple and cherry trees without a trace of beds and flower beds. This and through the fence could be seen at once. The fence was not a blank brick wall, but a cunning metal one. The graceful gate was ajar, but Jack was too shy to enter and called on his cell phone. I've got a girl Mary here to see a room. Oh, well, let's go inside, Mary dot as they walked down the stone-paved path. They approached the house. The front door opened, and on the threshold appeared the owner himself, holding a large and very shaggy white dog by the collar. From beneath his bangs he scrutinized Magoo and Jack. To realize that the owner was already well over 70, one had to look carefully at his face. Covered with a grid of wrinkles, were deep and sharp, were thinner and smaller. His gaze was quick and sharp, not senile. But its rays softened the wrinkle of his eyes. Not evil, Mary exhaled quietly. And if you didn't look at the face, there's no way you'd think the man was an old man by now. His posture was that of a middle-aged man. With a gaunt figure, there was no hint of decrepitude. Perfectly gray silver hair was cut very short, and a neat beard. In the same way, Gregory invited them into the house. So respectable on the outside, the house was cozy, but a little unusual on the inside. Of course, it was obvious from the many signs that a woman's hand had not been here for a long time, though the owner obviously kept the house in order. But the main thing was that it was as if several different times had gathered in the house. So different was the furniture, even the bedspreads and curtains. In the spacious hallway on the first floor of the XXI century, and in the living room, as if the 19th. It was clear even to Mary that the furniture was antique. She realized it must be rude to stare at everything so intently. Jack, at his host's suggestion, sat down on the edge of the guest sofa and kept modestly quiet. "Do you want to see your room at once, Mary?" asked Gregory. "Have you already decided that I'm the right tenant for you?" Mary was surprised and confused. "Have you already decided that I'm not suitable for you?" Laughed the owner. "Don't be so quick to judge. Let's see the room. It's right here on the first floor. I myself dine on the second floor. There's a study and a bedroom. The rest of the space is abandoned. It's just an old archive that's piled up. I've been sorting through it, but it's a little light. If you'd like to keep me company, I'd be sincerely grateful. Of course, if you're interested." "Come in, Mary." A square room overlooking a window into a cozy corner of the garden. It seemed very warm and cozy, though of the furniture there was only an old, empty chest of drawers, a small table with a mirror, and a bed. "We'll find a closet for the outfits," assured the landlord. "The curtains, if you don't like them, change them. The main thing is not to tear down the load-bearing walls, and the rest is all negotiable, solvable. I like the room. You just tell me about all your conditions at once in detail. You said you're renting out the place for household help, and I want to know what will be my duties. I'm conscientious. But you know I have some difficulties." "What a business-like girl you are," smiled the owner. "Your difficulties, as you put it, do not interfere with me. It may sound strange what I'm going to tell you, but try to understand. I know you have no one. I don't have anyone either. I could hire myself a housekeeper pro and have hired more, but I don't want an uncomfortable stranger professional servant person in the house. I don't have a need for the house to be perfectly cleaned, like for a magazine. And I need to be serviced like a luxury hotel. I need a live person in the house. I like you a lot. I don't like all people. No bigotry in the house. It's all the same. What would you do if I were your dad or grandfather living under the same roof as you? A little bit at a time, depending on your mood. Lest you doubt it, this isn't charity. This kind of work is worth about the price of a house. If you can help with the archives, that would be the most wonderful thing. I'll pay you like a secretary for that. Mary had a very different idea of what it would be like to talk to the landlord. It seemed suspicious that everything was going so well. Well, she'll probably find out the pitfalls later. When can we move in? If your friend Constantine will agree to drive back and forth for your things, then even today go. I'll give you money to stop by. Buy us something for dinner to celebrate the housewarming. Yes, I'll cook dinner, Mary promised. Let's go ask Jack. It turns out that the archive is not dusty and boring, does not make you sleepy. Documents a very interesting thing, as if reading a script. Only it was all real, especially the diaries. They're like living, like magical books, when there were no computers and not everyone had a typewriter, and only at work people just wrote down their thoughts with a pen on paper, and life itself was no easier than it is now. As Gregory said, no, there are a lot of good things now, but it would be better if the old good things stayed. It was very interesting with him in general. Helen was worried that Mary was bored with her old grandfather and asked her to come and visit them more often on weekends. Mary was happy to come and walked around town with her a couple times. And then she was just as happy to come back. "Oh, okay, my bunnies, I have to go home," she said last Saturday and was surprised herself. She already thought of this house and the little room in it as her real home, the one she had lived in long ago, and it was as if Granny's clock had always hung on the wall opposite her bed where Gregory had hung it. Not picking on you, Grandpa? Well, about the variety of the menu, or that you put things in the wrong place when cleaning, that you're not neat enough or lazy. What kind of complaints can a grandfather have? Probably like my Jack, only twice as much because of age. To be honest, it's hard for me to imagine Gregory as a picky old man. Mary laughed. As it happens, I don't do anything heavy at all. Just basic stuff, the same stuff I did when I lived with my grandmother. Dinner, simple cleaning. And Gregory takes away my cleaning supplies. If he thinks I should be tired by now, he always spoils me with goodies. He says he bought it for himself, but he barely touches it. Helen, he's an atypical grandfather. There was such a story. There lived a regular old, honored professor, invented various innovations for the Soviet industry and for the military. And he had two favorite students, both of whom had been working with him for many years. And shortly before the 90s, he started some serious project and was very hopeful of advancing it. One of his students worked with him on the technical part of the project, and the other one, who was more persuasive and dodgy, ran through all kinds of authorities to get funding, or some permits. For me, these technical scientific works just a dark forest. I only realized one thing about them: they are very long, and the result is not always as you expect. And so while these companions were working, the funding ran out and the country was in crisis. Soon there will be nothing to eat. It is unclear who will pay for the work, in general, even if you take everything valuable from home to the pawn shop. And when everything was ready, one of the apprentice companions disappeared. The one with the punching bag, Helen guessed, took all the developments with him and took off. That's what it was all about. Yeah, that's what it was. He left, patented an invention there, in another country, and provided for himself and his children for the rest of his life. And the professor almost had a stroke. He was ill for a long time, barely survived, and when he got back on his feet, his wife also took him to France, persuaded him. She had a close relative living there and married very well. The other student stayed here in Chicago. At first he thought he'd get drunk, but then somehow it all worked out. Talent, it finds a loophole. He met the right businessman, but a very smart one. He began to work for this man, a whole production to him, thought out and earned good money back in the 90s, and then also received an inheritance from France. It turns out that his favorite friend, a professor, still managed to work there, but for himself. And the professor had no children. He wrote such a will half of the property to his wife, half to his student and colleague Gregory, where I live. On this old archive, which we're going through now, is the professor's. Gregory carried it around with him everywhere, since he was left his surname as well. The antique furniture was left to him. The professor and his wife could have sold it before they left. It's not cheap, but the professor wanted to leave at least something valuable as a memento of himself to his student. He felt he'd let him down with his earnings and recognition. So when Gregory bought the house, he moved everything in, and now he lives surrounded by those memories. He wants to dismantle the archive, like he owes it to his teacher that someone here remembers him. Listen, why is your Gregory? If there are no heirs around such a wealthy grandfather, then there really is no one. There's something wrong with him, if no auntie's taken him in. He doesn't mention that at all. I don't ask. Maybe if he asked me something personal, I'd ask him, but he doesn't ask me either. I think he's embarrassed. He's so well-bred that he doesn't pry into other people's business. Yes, intellectuals are complicated, Helen confirmed with a knowing look, as if she talked to professors every day. Although, maybe, on the contrary, it's easier to live like that, if all these rules are observed. I won't make predictions, so as not to jinx it, but so far you seem to be lucky. You even look better, even though you're digging in dusty archives. Listen, I'm not intellectual, I'll ask you. Have you heard from Anthony? Helen, I'd be the first to tell you. I have no one in Chicago but you, Jack, and Gregory. Gregory rarely forgets anything, and now he's volunteered to help Mary peel apples for Helen. And it turns out he left his glasses in the office, probably on the desk or on the keyboard of his laptop. I'll be right there. Come on, I'll run in myself. I want to run up the stairs. Mary had only been in the office a few times. It was Gregory's diocese, as he put it, and he tidied it himself, leaving it a comfortable mess, not without logic. Occasionally he'd do a little rearrangement, swapping books on the shelves or statuettes from desk to floor and back again. Now on his antique desk next to his laptop, in addition to his glasses, there was a chessboard with Jask chess and a small photograph in a thin wooden frame. Mary hadn't noticed any pictures in the study before, at least not in any visible places.in, the black and white amateur photo. A little girl with 2 ponytails on top of her head is lying on the sand in the surf, laughing and hugging a large striped inflatable ball. Mary remembers every detail of this photo very well. She has the same one in her backpack, in the same folder with her passport, diploma, and several expensive photos. Gregory, the photo of the girl at sea, where did you get it? Mary asked, forgetting her shyness as soon as she went down to the kitchen and handed the landlord her glasses. I took this photo. I was into photography, replied Gregory, looking anxiously into Mary's face as if listening to her strange mood. That's my daughter, Emma. I carry the same picture with me. It came here with me. That's my mom, Emma. Had he found his daughter in time, there would have been someone to support her when her mother turned her away, because his Emma had chosen an unfavorable husband, and his granddaughter, Mary, would have had someone to support, and his son-in-law. Maybe her only real grandmother would still be alive, if her heart had paid for serious treatment. But history does not bear the subjunctive mood. As his teacher and colleague used to say, now we have to live on and live a long time, because soon there will be another tenant in the house, who will have to be taken care of for a long time, until he can take care of himself. And it is easy and pleasant to live long, easy and pleasant when you have someone to live for. Helen's voice was tense, and she hadn't called in the evening as usual, but on her lunch hour. Mary, would you mind if I popped straight over to your place after work today? Oh, nothing's wrong, everything's fine. Just in the mood to see you and chat. There's some little things I need to tell you. Yeah, come over, of course. Especially since Grandpa's going to a class reunion at the Institute, and he's worried about us being alone for so long. What if we need something in his absence, and he's not here? I'll at least reassure him that we won't miss him. Oh, great. Considering all the traffic, I'll be at your place by 8 p.m., Helen promised. Mary sent Grandpa off in a wet asphalt-colored suit, tied his tie, approved of his gentlemanly image, and escorted him to the meeting. She waved a long time after the cab. When she returned to the house, she dressed Emma and went out into the garden with her. In the far sunny corner under an apple tree, unnoticeable from the road, they had set up a real nest. There the grandfather had hung a baby cocoon for Emma. It seemed to Mary that her daughter loved to lie there and watch the sun bunnies playing in the apple leaves. She hummed something softly and amusingly in her own language, and then fell asleep and slept soundly. Whatever sounds came from the road, the clever dog, who knew not to bark now, sat nearby and just breathed noisily. There too, at arm's length, stood a small, elegant garden table and 2 armchairs. "She's going to have a beautiful voice," Grandpa laughed in a whisper, raising his index finger to the sky. "And she didn't go to the opera and operetta for nothing. When the city and nature became somehow especially dreary in October, Grandpa came up with an entertainment for Mary. What kind of theaters did she like? Mary didn't know which ones, or if she liked them at all. "I somehow have not had to be in them yet," she admitted without shyness. "We had nothing in our town but the House of Culture. And here I haven't had time. They used to bring some plays there sometimes, but I was never particularly interested in it.ic. What would have been interesting?" Grandpa kept up. "I like music," Mary confessed, "not electronic for disco, but beautiful music that is good for thinking or remembering something. And the grandfather took a season ticket to the theater, and he so fascinated Mary that the grandfather enjoyed spending time there, and the baby's movements she felt there for the first time. The ultrasound showed that it was a girl. Mary knew for sure a girl listens to music with her, swooning during opera arias and singing along. "You can say that I'm making it up, but Emma liked Queen of Spades the most," Mary once shared with her grandfather. He looked strangely and kept silent for about 5 minutes, like a deaf mute, as if he was talking to himself but couldn't say it out loud. Only his eyes glittered. Mary only then realized that she had not told him how she had decided to name her girl at once, as she had already called her. Emma was born in February, in a windy blizzard in the night. With balloons and flowers, 3 people greeted them from the maternity hospital: Grandpa and Helen and Jack. Jack drove them home, and it wasn't until the friends left after a small buffet that Grandpa sat down across from Mary and asked, "Maybe you did let Emma's father know she was born after all. What do you think?" "Grandpa, it's been so long since you asked anything about him at all. I thought you never would. You don't want to know anything about him?" "I just saw that you didn't want to talk about him, and now it's that kind of day. Maybe you'll see things differently now." "It's the trouble with people like you that you judge others by your own judgment," Mary objected. "You're right in some ways, but don't forget I'm old. I've learned a few things and gotten over my naivete. Just bring me up to speed, at least briefly, while our girl is asleep." And Mary did. To her surprise, it was not at all hard for her to tell her grandfather about Anthony and how easily he had left her, as if retelling a movie or Dennis. It didn't have the slightest relevance to her anymore. She has a different life with other people in charge. Grandpa agreed with Mary. Everyone who should know about Emma's birth had already been notified. It turned out that Mary only thought the recent past had evaporated completely. She was contacted by Helen. "We had a corporate party, a purely female group of people, and the conversation turned to how hard it is to raise a child alone. I told your story about how you found your grandfather, saying that things are not always so bad. I didn't even say your name, but I told them you were my friend. The girls were surprised, happy for you and your daughter, and cheered up. It would seem that was the end of it. A day later, on Sunday, the doorbell rings. There's your ex on the doorstep, looking anxiously for you. I let him in. Or rather, I was just confused by surprise and forgot that I had to refuse the bore." I said, "What a phenomenon." Then he began to me clearly on the prepared to him script. He understands that I consider him a scoundrel. He fully agrees. He is a scoundrel, but only realized everything, and so on in the same style. Probably watched a couple shows as a guide. I sit, nodding, pretending to be touched by his remorse. He sings to me that he would have apologized to you long ago, if you had not changed your phone number and place of residence. He lost track of you, you see. And he only dared to ask me now. He was so ashamed to show up. I was too lazy to ask him tricky questions. I was so disgusted. He thinks I'm a fool. No, I don't pretend to be a smart woman, but not to that extent. I don't know how to get rid of him. Jack was on a fishing trip with Andrew, which would have been easier. Anthony started begging me, "Give me an address. At least give me a phone number." I told him I had my own life and my own business. I had no time to deal with other people's. We haven't talked for a long time. Since we separated, we were just neighbors. Maybe Mary's gone home. Why don't you go to your town if you have to? And he didn't believe me for a second. He started going, don't lie to me. I didn't do anything to hurt you, Dot. He's angry and about to threaten me, even though it's not good for him. I was lucky there was no bite and Jack got home early. So Jack kicked him out. I talked to him outside and made him promise not to come back. Helen paused for a long sip of frozen coffee, patted the dog's withers, and, without waiting for Mary to comment, continued. I'm just convinced I was from the beginning that his appearance had something to do with my chatter. And he heard about you at the corporate party, that you were living well, so he decided to try his luck and get a fat piece. It just seems like a big city. In cases like this, you find out it's small. It turns out someone always sees something, hears something, and passes it on to the wrong person. And I'm an accountant. I have a personnel department nearby. I'm friends with our personnel officer. I told her the situation, asked her to look in the profiles where the husbands of those girls who were sitting with us in the company and listening to my story work. We got in, looked at it for a short time. Only 7 of the girls were married. And my hunch was right. Kate from sales has her husband's place of employment on her profile, just like your Anthony. You said the name, and I remember things like that. Remember when we were laughing? It's too much of a match. Didn't I mention you were my roommate the other day? Mary, I'm sorry, and keep in mind he might show up. Oh, come on. Mary smiled, trying to be as serene as possible. You've made such a detective out of nothing, even going into the personnel records. It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have foreseen anything, you just told me in the mood. I've always loved hearing other girls' stories, too. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. If you don't gossip, don't say nasty things behind your back, and just talk about a person, it's okay. Thank you so much for not being mad at me. I'd understand if you were mad at me. Are you going to do anything about it? What do you mean? I don't get it, Mary. Shoving my stuff in my suitcase and running off somewhere. No one came to see me. Even if Anthony somehow finds out where I live, it's not like he's going to come here. Unless you told him it's a threesome. Maybe he's picturing a mansion with columns, an alarm system, a panic button, and a couple of grim bodyguards. Yeah, I didn't mention that. Helen exhaled with a sigh of relief. Oh, I even said that you have a gorgeous dog, a sheepdog. By the way, this breed is considered unpredictable and aggressive. By the way, you do have an alarm system, don't you? Grandpa returned home lively, satisfied with the meeting with old friends. He joked, retold stories of his classmates, sent greetings from them to his granddaughter and great-granddaughter, and announced that he had missed them. Mary would not tell him about the incident with the girl's father. Not right, if only he would take care of her and Emma. He needs to be taken care of too, and there's no one else to do it but her. Of course she was scared at first, but just a little bit and at first. Anthony is not a villain or a criminal mastermind, but an ordinary selfish guy. Nothing to be afraid of at all. She'll think of something if he shows up. A month later, Mary almost forgot about the warning Helen she had no time to think about unpleasant things. Her daughter grew up, already sat in the crib and stroller, tried to sit even in a soft cocoon. When she saw the dog, she was happy and stretched her arms to him, trying to run them into his shaggy fur. Don't worry, Grandpa reassured her confidently. He understands perfectly well that it's a puppy. Helen came almost every weekend with her son, and sometimes with Jack. But Mary also had a sudden urge to go to Chicago. Grandpa was supportive. The baby's over 6 months old now. It's time for you to go out. Go out with Helen, at least just a carefree summer cafe. Moms need to rest too. Why don't you pump your milk and I'll feed just fine without you. I quietly read the literature about children and control quietly the process of cultivation and upbringing. Grandpa grinned, and Mary went to Helen's house. They did not sit in an outdoor cafe and walked around the zoo, but still had a great time. They talked about coming here with Emma very soon and showing her bigger animals than sheepdogs, which would be interesting. They talked about when Emma gets a little older, Mary is going to open up a little beauty parlor. Grandpa wants to help her start a business she enjoys, and it would just be great if Helen would agree to do the bookkeeping there. They did laps of the zoo 3 times. Bruno didn't want to leave. When we managed to get him out, we bought ice cream and sat on a park bench with him. Mary took a bite of the ice cream with pleasure and heard a half-forgotten familiar voice from the side. She shuddered. It seemed to her that Helen did too. Bruno was running around the flower beds, eating his ice cream on the run. Anthony stepped out of the shade of a tree and stood in front of them. "Mary, hello. We have to go." Helen rushed over. "We're late. Let's go. "I'm listening." The last kindly indifferent words were meant for Anthony. "Where's our daughter?" he asked, making a worried face. "We don't have anything of ours," Mary explained peacefully. "I'm sorry if you can. I need you, you and your daughter. It just took me a long time to realize it. I'll do anything for you. If you'll let me try to start over. Helen told you I was looking for you, didn't she?" Helen stood aside by the flower bed and listened, not even pulling away from Bruno, who was jumping around her. Mary wrinkled her nose slightly. "Very, very theatrical. I have nothing to forgive you. It was the right thing to do. Thank you for your daughter. She's beautiful." "What do you mean?" Anthony said in a muffled voice, with reproach and admiration at the same time. "I don't hold a grudge, Anthony. And I won't be filing for alimony. Don't worry. You'll still have all your savings." "Mary, don't do this to me. You couldn't have gotten over it so fast. I know you. It wouldn't have been you. People don't change that fast. And we have a daughter, and you won't even let me look at her. I know you found your grandfather, but that's not the father. I'm not giving up until you give me a chance." Now he will play the macho man who has decided to fight for his love. Mary got up from the bench, slowly walked around Anthony, lightly stroked his shoulder. She made sure he took it as a good sign, and said in the same secure, peaceful, and calm voice, "People change. People change and fast, too, when circumstances force them to. I know you're aware of my financial changes, so you're under no illusions. I'm glad I wasn't married to you by the time I found my grandfather. You can find a much better option with an inheritance, even with a child. One more piece of advice. If you decide to look for me or my daughter, in any way to let me know about myself, you know who, what, and how in the 90s earned, with whom you had to communicate. The acquaintances of my grandfather and now of me are corresponding. My grandfather owes a lot to the reputable Mr. Jacobson. If that name means anything to you, people like that don't take away their protection for no reason. You can always turn to them to get rid of unwanted nuisances like you, Anthony. It's nothing personal. Consider it a sign of forgiveness." "Bitch." Anthony exhaled angrily into her ear and staggered back, just in case. He turned around and walked across the lawn toward the zoo. "Now he's going to disappear from the horizon," Helen said. "Listen, I wasn't expecting you. Have you really changed? I felt that I'm not alone in the world, and I've changed." "I know." "Mary, who's Jacobson? You never told me about him. Is he the guy your grandfather invented the production lines for?" "I don't even know his name. I just made him up." Passers-by turned around, some irritated, but most smiled. How cheerful, infectious laughter of these young, beautiful girls, and the baby runs around them so happy. Jack came to pick them up, as arranged. "Oh, I could hardly get through the traffic," he exhaled. "Can you imagine? Some uncle jumped up to Andrew and me while we were fishing and began to claim with a pompous attitude that we had taken his permanent place. That's the first time that's ever happened. And you know me, if he'd asked nicely, we'd have left. And you'd go to Mr. Jacobson," Helen joked. "Who the hell is that?" "No idea. We just made him up. He's supposed to be a powerful friend of my grandfather's." "Oh, girls, you're so grown up with children and you're still joking. I'll tell my grandfather that you've invented some dubious acquaintances." The group of people, laughing and smiling, continued walking through the park.